Welcome, everyone, to ICCO's Ignite series. This is episode 9. So, if you're joining us here or on ICCO's YouTube channel, or if you're watching this back later on, um, thank you very much for your participation. We're going to tackle a topic that I think is probably of interest to many communicators at the moment, and that is the future state of communications in terms of governing the digital dialogue. And we have a great group of panelists for today's discussion. So I'm going to introduce them in no particular order. We have Alex Malouf, who's the founder of Narrative Shapers in Saudi Arabia. We have got Ashan Jayatilaka, the head of group communications for Haley's Group in Sri Lanka. We have Candy Window, who's advisory board member for Perhumas, the Indonesia PR Association, and an institutional branding expert. Of course, Candy is based in Indonesia. And we have Lavanya Wadgaonkar, who's the Chief Communication Officer for Nissan Motor Corporation in Japan. So welcome to all of you.
Thanks, Arun. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Thank
So
you
we
for
are
having
going
us.
to, yeah, thank you, Candy. We are going to talk about a few things today. And I think in particular, we're going to look at how really digital communications broadly is changing, which I think is quite an interesting conversation because we focus so much of our time and attention, I feel, as communicators these days on AI, um, and on creators. But none of that, I think, is really possible without considering the broader digital ecosystem, in which all of this lives and which increasingly defines communications now from an organizational level. You know, this is the era of memes, of comments going viral, of AI created videos, um, and all kinds of styles and methods and formats of communication which are utterly native to the digital era. Um, and I think for many organizations, they have embraced these changes, but of course, it's not always that easy from an organizational perspective, especially if your policies and frameworks were built um, with the analog world in mind. So we will get to some of these questions, but to start off with, I wanted to ask each of our panelists, first of all, when you think about the future of communications, what is the biggest change organizations need to prepare for over the next 5 years? And Alex, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Aaron, you always ask the easiest questions. You really do. I think, look, given where I am, I think it would be amiss to say that the function is becoming ever more complex. We have to deal with so much more in terms of risk. Allied on top of that, you have the geopolitics. You've got issues coming around, from every single side. So, we're being asked effectively to do more. At the same time, budgets and headcounts aren't rising at the same pace, if they are even rising. So, we keep saying we are a critical function. In many ways, we are. But I don't think that's always reflected in terms of the money and the resources that we are given to actually do our job and do it well. So complexity, challenges around us, and yet, I think too often we're firefighting, given everything we have to do.
Yeah, very good point. Candy, let me come to you next, if you don't mind.
Yes. What Indonesia is facing in the last 12 months, the speed has outgrown trust. And content now has outgrown context. And now what institutions are facing is being judged, not only by what they say, but whether the public believes they have the moral right to say such things. So what's happening right now, the dialogue, the society, or voicing out, what they feel, what they think. And now this means the biggest change in what organizations are facing. Every content now becomes a verdict. So it's no longer about a viral issue staying, information for the society to assess. Yeah. But right now, within hours, it becomes a moral judgment. So right now, what we are considering now is not only, the information we need to convey, but what are the moral issues we're facing, especially in the context of society.
Wow. Gosh, it sounds like fun. It's definitely quite high stakes by the sounds of it. Ashan, over to you. How do you see it in terms of the biggest change?
Thanks, Arun. It is a lot of fun. I think for all of us, it's high stakes and like what was mentioned earlier, it's high speed, right? So for me, biggest change that we all need to prepare for is essentially the fact that now, today, for everybody has a lot of information at their fingertips, right? All the competitors do. So it crunches down time. So the speed of our teams to be able to communicate fast, even internally to get those approvals. The processes have to be streamlined. I mean, if you have a bit of a bureaucratic system, then you will be slow. You will not be able to kind of manage. So how can you get your systems and processes also streamlined so that you're able to cope with this speed that we are all expected to live by? So something we try and do constantly is in our corporate, we talk to our departments and we try and ensure that we understand their goals and align with them, see what kind of processes we may need to be able to cope with everything that we need to do. So around the corporate right now, as I'm sure most companies have, this digital transformation type of initiatives that are happening. So I got one of my team members into this cross-functional team, right? So that person kind of gets the learnings and understanding of how he can support some of the workflow automations and so on, so that we can maybe do things a little faster. I think speed is the name of the game, basically.
Yeah, very good point. Lavanya, you get the final word on this question.
I wouldn't say it's the final word, but interesting perspectives from everybody. For me, I don't think the word change applies to communication because that's our constant. It's about evolution. The only difference today is the evolution is faster than what we have seen in the past, especially with the AI playing a role. I would say for me, the next few years for us, and I don't want to look into 10, 20 years because those have no meaning anymore. We're looking at 1 to 5 years as the future already. But it's not about producing more content. It is about producing content that's credible. That's number one. The second is the role of communicators, from message distributors to becoming narrative architects and narrative governance. that makes more sense for us as we move. So basically, what I would say is we need to focus on signals that build trust rather than information, because information is readily available today. AI makes it even easier for information to be there. What we cannot take for granted today is attention, trust, and credibility. So I guess for me, I would say fundamentals of communication remain, but they are changing faster because of the context.
Yeah, but it's great responses from all of you. So um, from Lavanya, the need for more credible content, the shift towards narrative architecture and governance. We'll talk more about that in a moment. From Ashan, the big shift is speed, which of course I think is fueled by AI and by all of the digital and social media channels. Candy mentioned trust lagging behind the speed of content. So organizations being judged not on what they say, but whether they have the moral credibility to say it in the first place. And Alex described communications becoming more complex, um, more risk, more geopolitics, more firefighting, but without necessarily the budget or headcount growth to help address these kind of elevated challenges. That's a pretty good summary, I think, of where the communications function is today, particularly in terms of that kind of risk environment in particular. So let's move on to the first thing I wanted to ask you about, which is about this idea of the digital information environment, which all of us is immersed in now. What does effective governance look like today for the organizations that you work for or the organizations that you advise? And how is it changing, do you feel? Because, I think we're all quite familiar with the social media era, but now we're moving, I feel, into a different era where there are dark channels, there's, sites like Reddit, Discord, and then of course there's the ever-present impact of AI on so much of discourse. But at the same time, organizations, as Candy pointed out, and as Lavanya pointed out, they are being judged on how credible they are, on their moral standing. So they can't, they have to I think walk something of a tightrope in terms of succeeding in that digital environment. So I'm curious to hear how each of you view governance of communication strategies in that environment. Lavanya, maybe I'll reverse the order this time and start with you.
A tough question. I think the way I look at it, and we are still struggling to define governance in the AI era. So I wouldn't say the answer I would give is an answer that I'm pretty well aware of, but I would focus on saying what we are trying to do is look at the entire ecosystem. So earlier, governance was meant to be more about a process, a standard operating procedure, an escalation metrics that works in an organization. And then you have monitoring tools and listening tools and the reports that go in. But governance today is an ecosystem, which is an entire organization ecosystem, I would say. So one of the major challenges you face in a company like Nissan, which is it's an engineering company with the highest security blocking information at every minute, and then you have the new devil called AI, which needs to be fed the right information if you really want it to be effective. Now, that is where we are stuck. What's the point where you actually open information to this beast called AI? And if you do not open, then how do you suffer? So I think that's one of the biggest challenges we are facing today. The second is the escalation process, which was a very simple process earlier. which is, the crisis management committee that sits there and you go through all functions, need to change because the escalation process today is not linear. It can come from anywhere, and it's more of a network that functions. This is a second. So defining that network and then decision making. Who becomes a decision maker today in that case? Is it going to be a comset? Is it going to be the CEO, or is it going to be an AI system that's deciding certain things for us? So that where do you draw the lines? That's very important. And then the standards. So standards are, I would say, is the beginning of the governance process that we talk about. And then we move around. So for me, this is the entire gamut of ecosystem and channels that we need to keep in mind when we work on governance, Arun.
Yeah, very comprehensive. Thank you, Lavanya. Ashan, how are you dealing with these kinds of questions around governance, around control of information versus opening it up for AI, and around, things like crisis risk protocols, in a kind of non-linear digital environment?
Yeah, so in terms of the governance of this digital world, Arun, I think it starts with information integrity, right? And I mean, it's a tough world out there because it's not just a digital world. I think it's a digital multiverse because you have so many places where it's not you who necessarily need to talk, but it's a place where so many others are speaking for you. And you also need to monitor and you need to see what's going on, right? It's like another universe in a sci-fi movie, how all of this happens. So I think digital governance can help if you are bringing in something like online reputation management systems, processes. So something we have is we've tried to identify where all these portals or sources are, where you can have all these conversations going on, be it Reddit or Glassdoor, or if you're in the leisure industry, or TripAdvisor, it's all over the place. And then on your social channels, your sort of how your community is engaging with you in public or private. So I think if we can identify what all these portals are, and then how frequently you need to be looking into it, and seeing whether you have to kind of beyond monitoring, whether you have to escalate something. So I think it's an interesting time, but it's good to have a governance where you have this sort of holistic online reputation management. It's something that we've commenced, and I think it helps us get a grip on things. We kind of know what the conversations are. So that's another interesting challenge for us.
Yeah, the importance of listening and understanding, crucial. Candy, I mean, these are kind of clearly the skills that organizations need today, but are they ready for everything they may hear online?
Whether they like it or not, they need to be ready. But what is happening right now, especially in Indonesia, the institution and organization that we face, what they do know is they have traditional governance, the messaging control, who says what, what it should be said in terms of regulation. That they've got, down pat. But right now they are shifting because the diversity in Indonesian society, we need to find a common value. We need to find a way to unite whatever programs, whatever businesses and markets. So the effective governance today is moving not only the traditional governance, but it's also moving towards moral stewardship. Because in every exercise, whatever program any corporate will be doing or organizations, we need to find a value that we can fit to the society or community that we are targeting. So right now, the focus is the principles, build trust before, not during. behavior over messaging. So what assets do they have now? So these are the questions that we ask. Yeah. At least there are things that you have been doing right. Yeah. The third thing is moral proprietary. So what is it that the company is doing good? And we are thinking of the welfare of society, and that's what we latch onto in terms of governance.
Okay, those are fairly significant commitments, I think, for companies to bear in mind. And Alex, how does it look from your perspective? Do you feel there's also that shift towards, shared values and moral grounding?
Aaron, you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say I wish. Look, where we are today, you can look at this from different perspectives. One is political perspective, whereby everything in what we call democracies or democratic systems has become polarized. You're either left or right. You're either for or against. There is very little in the middle in terms of discussion and debate. At least that's how it feels in traditional media and also as well as social media. Now, when it comes to culture, likewise, you have debates on what are deemed sort of Western concepts. The simplest one to think of is maybe LGBTQ plus. You've got debates around religion. If you look at what's happening again in democracies and then in parts of the world that I am, for example, how is Islam portrayed? How is Judaism portrayed? Christianity as well, other religions, Hinduism, as an example. You have debates internally within organizations in terms of, what we should be doing, how should we be doing it? How do companies get involved on topics like sustainability, climate change? How do they get involved in sports? Which groups do they support? Who do they support? Even in things as simple as remuneration for their executives, and how is that seen by local communities? I could go on and on and on, but honestly, I think we are at a time when there's been less agreement than ever on anything, on any topic. And again, it just makes our jobs, you could either say it makes our jobs more interesting, or you could also say it makes our jobs more challenging.
Well, interesting times, I guess. It seems like as more than one of you has pointed out, in this sort of digital town square, every single aspect of how a company or an organization runs its operations is open for comment, for debate, and even from employees themselves, right? We see a lot of that. Let's talk a little bit about the impact of misinformation and this kind of climate of skepticism that we're seeing in across the public. And Candy, you've alluded to it just in terms of it's not just what companies say, but whether they have the standing to actually say things. Um, how are you all responding to that kind of skepticism and an environment in which there is more misinformation? It's not always clear where it's coming from. There are deep fakes. It seems like it's more volatile and there are more crises. Um, how do you deal with that kind of situation? How do you respond? How do you ensure you're not amplifying misinformation? So, Candy, maybe I can come to you first.
Yes, I mean, today, that is exactly what we're facing. Left, right, and center. A lot of deep fakes, a lot of misinformation. What is happening right now, we still use the open networks, the social medias, the mainstream media. So that is still being used. But the extra step that we are also taking is actually the closed networks, such as I think all of us, especially from the collective societies, we all have WhatsApp groups, be it close families, big families, we have alumni, we have neighborhoods WhatsApp group. So all of those have influential leaders. Those are the people who are calling the shots, actually. So whatever that is happening, the viral crisis that is happening, especially in the open networks, the meaning is determined by the religious leaders, by the political leaders. If it's things at work, it will be the CEO. What is he saying? So all of these are happening in the closed networks, and that's why the what I call the offline relationship building is where most important. So this is where all the corporate programs, we may call it CSR, all these things are ways to close the gap and find. It's also a process to find shared values.
Lavanya, over to you.
It's an interesting question. I agree with Candy about what we are dealing. I think deepfakes or synthetic media and even AI hallucination these days is one of the biggest challenges you face as an organization. But I go back to my original thought about what's happening in the world, and that's about credibility. So I think it's today the source of information, but the differentiator for an organization would be a credible source of information. This could be, like Candy alluded to, is a face of the company, like a CEO who is more trusted, or it could be the micro influencers that you use, who could become really good collaborators with the organization to be able to clarify. But most of all is active intelligence. So if we don't recognize the issue, the fake news quickly, it may spread much faster. And the key for us as a company is first to establish active intelligence so that we have the proper intelligence that's coming to us. Second, we have our credible sources of information. It could be our website, our CEO, or the micro influencers I were talking about, or internally it could be the influential employees as well. This is very important. I'll give you a few examples. We always have leaks happening, and most of the leaks and speculations may not be true. But this is today's world. The media thrives, even traditional media. When we used to think in the past about journalistic ethics, and I wouldn't say that really hold any true today, because it's all about a number of clicks, right? So the thing that we established internally is a direct channel to our CEO, because the employees only trust that voice that comes. And so it immediately, the first thing that we do when there's a fake news or when there is speculation that's going around is a message from CEO that goes with no time wasted. This is important. Second, we use our own website, not social channels, because social channels are difficult to handle sometimes with the speed with which things spread. But our website, actually, with AI coming into picture, is becoming a very powerful tool that you could use. So we're dealing with this. But frankly speaking, Arun, there is no one solution to this problem. It's going to spread. So it is about the readiness of the organization, the speed with which we respond to it, and the credibility of the people that we use to be able to clarify. I think those three are very important.
Yeah, very helpful advice. Alex, how are you advising your clients to respond to this kind of escalated threat environment?
I think we've, at least in my region, we've been in this position for a while now. It's got to a point where, a number of websites, sort of government, semi-government, cannot be accessed from outside of Saudi because they're basically blocked off foreign IP addresses because of the threat of cybersecurity attacks. I think, it is becoming increasingly difficult to work out online what is true, what is false. When something, and again, luckily, at least where I am, it's still more focused on the politics rather than the business. But when any political statements do come out, it's really no coincidence that you see several hundred accounts attacking all pretty much on the same topic. Almost almost in a domino effect. It's very, very convenient. We're seeing sort of the growth of avatar commentators, people who are, fake journalists making up news stories. And I was reading about the piece about that agency, which was using fake avatars to make pitches to journalists. Again, fascinating. I'd love to see how they set up, because that just will be a lesson in terms of how to effectively engineer AI. But trying to tell the difference between real and fake online, I think it's a skill that we're all going to have to develop more of. It's going to have to become essentially one of our muscles. And likewise, we also need to counsel our clients. Not everything you see online is real, is true. It's actually, it's funny. I said the same thing to my mother-in-law as well. Don't believe everything that you see. And take everything with a pinch of salt. We don't need to respond to every single thing that comes in our way. We can take our time. Actually, this is one of the things I do say to clients is, build your own community base, because your community more often than not will actually come to your own defense and push back. So, if you have real followers who believe in what you do and what you are saying, they will be, one of the most effective reputational shields you can think of. So, yeah, but it's a wild west out there. It's as simple as that.
Ashan, how are you seeing crisis playbooks evolving in response to, these new threats represented by misinformation and deep fakes and AI-fueled narratives?
Yeah, no, it's funny because when you reflect, when you join this communications profession, and then the kind of training that is there, like that I remember long time back, how to deal with a crisis, and these playbooks come in, and even now you have something that's kind of the next evolution of a playbook. You talk about issue response protocols, right? So there is this particular phrase that we hear a lot of. We are trained for these IRPs. So there is detection and then escalation, and then the good thing to do is to have these templates, these communication templates that you keep, so that you can tweak it and update it. But I mean, somehow or the other, if something hits all of that, doesn't really help to 100%. It'll get you so far. In terms of you're kind of not running around like a headless chicken. You have some kind of process, or the kind of steps that you need to take, but it's still like finding your way in the dark at times. So with today's kind of volatile situation, I mean, whatever that is happening, geopolitical changes in all over the world is affecting our market as well, right? Be it the trade, imports, exports, logistics, all of that. So it's interesting, but then having some kind of IRP helps you kind of find your way. Also, you have to think of the culture of the organization. Organization maybe one that is sort of very transparent, or for the slightest thing, they will go out there, they will make a statement. Or conversely, organization might be very hesitant to talk as well. My perspective is it's kind of, you need to look at your stakeholders and need to know approach. So you don't need to post everything on your digital channels. I think the comment was made, once you do go out there on digital and you try and have that conversation, it can go any which way. So you have to ask whether responding spreads it further, or will it contain it? These are the questions that keep us all up at night, right? Are we going to fan the flames, or or can we put an end to it? So I mean, the worry now, unfortunately, with all of this AO, GEO, all of that, is that if I guess a credible site or credible portal gets wind of this, whatever this issue, even if it's fake, and it talks about it, it can get referred, right? It could be reference for somebody who's like looking at your industry and your business. So sometimes I feel you have no choice but to ensure that your side of the story is kind of out there, so that there is some kind of balance to all of this. But like, don't let internal panic also dictate what you're doing, because the comms team may be seasoned and understands what would be at a level 1 of severity versus a level 5 of severity. So I think there has to be some kind of training in place. To some extent, management hopefully would understand proportionality of what is happening. So you escalate, based on the kinds of issues that you get. So it's fun times. I mean, with all of this, the playbook can only take you so far. Something I have learned, though, interesting one, is it's good to document. Even if it's a small thing, it's good to document it. It can help you next time. And even in the sense of, you may think it's a small issue right now, but if it blows up and if there are these bad actors who are out there who are kind of taking this forward, you might actually need need those screenshots and that kind of evidence to fight it later. So documentation and monitoring, however small it is good. And then if you want to take action later, that's up to the leadership and the team in charge.
I'm hearing in all of these responses, it's not about the technology necessarily. It's not about, whatever the latest monitoring tools are or the channels or even the AI. It's about the judgment from each of you. It really seems to come down to just judging what is happening. Is it worth responding to? Is it real? Um, how quickly are you going to move? Who are your trusted channels and voices? Um, so I think that's reassuring. And it brings me quite neatly to my next question. But before that, I just want to say to anyone here, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A or into the chat, whichever is easier. And I will ask probably one more question, and then we will take any questions from the floor. But it takes me to my next question, which is, what are, given everything we've talked about today and these kind of quite significant shifts in the way that organizations are being held to account online, how does that change the capabilities and skills, perhaps, that you're looking for, maybe from the next generation of communications leaders, or even this generation of communications leaders? What skills are maybe becoming less important? And are there particular areas, capability skills that you feel comms teams should be investing more in right now? So maybe Ashan, if I could start with you on this one.
So skills, I mean, the basics, right? You have to be up to date on the news, and upskill yourself. You can't drop the ball at the rate that things are going now. But we have to think, everybody is going to be using AI and trying to come up with certain things on these various tools and platforms. So you really need to be strategic and probably innovative and creative yourself, because I mean, if you think of the campaigns that we're looking at, to come up with the right insight, to think of your cultural or your social tensions or your personal experiences that you have gone through, or what you have seen your let's say people around you go through. I mean, these are great insights for campaigns, let's say. And it's not always something that you will get out of AI. So I would like to see people who are capable of thinking out of the box themselves and, applying all of this versus, just trying to get everything out of the AI tools. The other thing is empathy and emotional intelligence. It's always something we've been saying in this communications role. I mean, AI will, at least right now, not be able to replace those kind of insights that you can really bring out in your work, or when you talk to your internal stakeholders, when you kind of try and understand what's happening and what you need to communicate out there. When you talk to media, it was mentioned earlier, media relations are so important. That's not going to change, although there are different dimensions now beyond traditional media. And then obviously when you are talking to your stakeholders, right, be it your consumer or your regulator or whoever it is, that emotional intelligence and trying to understand what their expectation is and putting it to them, these are not going to change, and we would need people coming out who will be able to apply that human touch in their dealings and in their content and all of it. I think without that, we have enough of AI and robotics and all of this, but we need the human side to be coming out. So definitely things that are more mundane can be automated, Arun. I mean, for sure, we also do certain calculations like where scale comes in and repetition comes in. These would be areas where, yes, I mean, we don't need a whole team doing that. We can always automate things like that. But there are certain things that even content generation, people are looking at AI and developing a lot of content. So I have this potentially unreasonable fear that at some point, if AI and systems come crashing down, then what's going to happen, right? So we all still need to understand the art of communication and writing and what will make a difference, what is relevant and all of that. So, I mean, not that I'm saying civilization will come to a tragic standstill, but in this communications profession, it would be good if we still have to know the basics, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. The human element, I think, in particularly as you mentioned, empathy, emotional intelligence, insight, and independent thought are as important as ever. Lavanya, what do you think in terms of the skills that matter?
I tend to agree to what Ashan was saying as well. For me, fundamentals of communication skills don't change. They remain because that's what makes us communicators. So I would add storytelling, the narrative architecture, the 5 Ws that we use in communication today has become more important because of AI than it was in the past. So fundamentals don't change. What we need to train the future generation, given the AI environment that all of us are talking about, is not to be shy of using AI. Because I keep seeing these articles these days popping up showing a difference between human writing and AI writing. You're creating bias among younger generation where some of them are hiding their necessity to use AI. We should stop that. AI literacy is very critical. AI will not replace people, but people who know how to use AI will definitely replace. So I think we shouldn't create this bias. AI literacy for sure. I would say a couple of things that are becoming more mandatory, at least for companies like ours, is AEO. So for past 20 years, we've been writing content to optimize for search engine. So we've always been looking at that. Now, I think the next 5 years is to optimize content for AI systems, especially AEO. So this is very important. It needs a necessary skill of writing, and this is important. We cannot ignore this fact. So people need to start using that. I would say what is the differentiator is the human judgment. The only challenge that I face with usage of AI systems and also the modern digital tools is the less the human judgment is becoming lesser and lesser. The accuracy, the transparency, and skills are becoming very less. This is where we need to encourage our teams not to lose track of that. And the one skill I will also add, Arun, is data analysis. And I still feel communications industry is very weak even now when it comes to data analysis. We're still struggling with our own vanity metrics, trying to prove a point, which turns out to be no impact for business. So I think that is one of the most important skill for me is how do you use data to be able to make a business case, not a case for communication. This is the most important one. Sorry, that may be a long answer, but that's one of the
No,
critical.
it's very illuminating actually in the kind of the arc from the fundamentals through to AI literacy, but then of course human judgment and data and analytics as well. Alex, which are the skills that you're seeing as being most important?
Um, I like the skill of common sense. The irony is that it's not common. And I think with everything that we are being asked to do, we do need to have a wider set of awareness in a myriad of areas. We need to be more politically astute, effectively corporate affairs. And that's what, essentially comms, a lot of what we do now is emerging into corporate affairs. So it has a wider geopolitical angle as well. Sustainability, climate change is a major one. I think it's going to, it's already affecting most of us. And with that, what I'd say is we need to go beyond surface level communications. We need to get more into the science. We need to start debunking a lot of stuff that is out there. So we do need to become experts in that domain. And I think again, what we're going to see with a lot of the comms is a separation. We see it with a lot of the multinationals where you've got specific fields and functions for communications to sit in, and where people may double hat in terms of doing things. One element may be human focused, another may be focused towards a specific issue, or maybe science, for example. And I think we are going to have to do more of that. Digital is a big one. I'd love to see more communicators being digitally savvy. Obviously, AI, that's another area where we're going to have to sharpen our skills, because we know if we don't do it, we've seen it before, if we don't do it, the marketers are going to jump in and claim it for themselves. And given that a lot of it is content driven, we should be managing that and we should be sitting on top of it. So again, that's just a snapshot, but there's many other things we could discuss in this space.
Sure. And then Candy?
The next generation of communication leaders will be trust architects. So yes, let's embrace AI in what it can do. But the four important capabilities that only humans can do, cultural and moral literacy, network intelligence, finding out who are the trusted leaders, ethical judgment at speed, and AI fluency paired with wisdom. Again, let's, return back to our humanity side, but of course, empowered by AI.
That's a pretty thorough view, I think, of all the skills that communicators will need. It's quite a long list, I have to say. It's going to be an interesting couple of decades for the comms function. Not that the past couple of decades wasn't interesting enough. So we have one question from the floor. Let's go to that first before I ask you for your final comments. What does transparency mean to Gen Z when brands are using AI influencers and creators. Does that change? Does that change the transparency conversation for any of you? I don't know if any of you would like to respond to that question.
It's a very, very interesting question, I would say. I think for me, Gen Z, it's more authenticity for them. The previous generations believed in sources, credibility, a lot of content that is produced by companies, and they come from an environment where trust was higher. It wasn't as delicate as today, but the Gen Z is they can see through because information is at their fingertips. They can easily see through the fake stuff. They believe in authenticity. They believe in emotions, and this changes a lot. Today, you really cannot go around, talking in a roundabout way. You got to be straightforward. You got to be clear. You got to be consistent, and you got to be credible when you talk to them.
Yep, well said. Anyone want to add anything to that?
I'm happy to jump in, Aaron. I think with Gen Z, look, they want communications without the crap. They don't want corporate speak. They want to have a brutally honest discussion. They can increasingly see through paid media. They can see through influencer recommendations, especially when the influencers are basically saying positive things about everything and everybody. All the food is wow, it's amazing, life changing. They don't want that anymore. They want to have honest, straight conversations. They just want to hear, what is good and what is bad, and then they want to then go away and make up their own mind. To try and sort of sway them with paid, it just doesn't work anymore. And actually, that's why I think a lot of the marketing is increasingly being shifted to content creation, because just paid above the line just doesn't work like it used to anymore.
Okay, and with that in mind, let's move on to the final question. So, very quick one for each of you, one sentence each. If you could leave comms leaders with one piece of advice to help them navigate the future digital landscape, what would it be? Candy, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Yes. Start with trust. Do the hard work. Embed that trust by doing tangible things with the community. And then when things go wrong, a viral crisis or what have you, those people will have your back. So actually, trust comes first. And then we face everything else with communication.
Sure. Ashan?
Arun, for me, maybe I'm repeating myself, but I think the pace of the world, it makes it very easy to leave behind the basics, right? So we should always remember, even though the landscape is very volatile and it's constantly changing and all of these things are happening, quality checks, relationships with your media, with your internal stakeholders, being respectful to the people that you are talking to. You can chase AI and all of these things, but we have to retain our humanity through the whole thing.
Alex?
I think transparency is a huge one. I think in a world where we are surrounded by fake information, misinformation, by people with their own agendas, I think transparency really is the way to cut through. As I said, get away from the corporate speak. Speak like your stakeholders speak. Talk their language. Be transparent. Take them on the journey with you. Share the good and the bad, the ups and the downs. Because again, that's just simply how life is. And I think if you do that, you build credibility. It's authentic. It is real. And you do essentially, at the end of the day, you develop trust with that community. I think, though, that's not one of the hardest things to do, because transparency at least in the corporate world and also with governments, is not a natural communications approach. So it does take time to try and win your internal stakeholders over. But I think just in transparency really is the way to go for the industry.
Okay, great. And Lavanya?
Fundamentals. I think we shouldn't forget that technology, we can chase technology, but technology is just an enabler. Fundamentals of communications don't change. So for me, the three C's, I think everyone said the same, but for me, the three C's are context, credibility, and consistency. There's no replacing those three words.
Well, very consistent answers here, at least. Start with trust, don't lose the basics, sustain transparency, and the importance of the fundamentals, the three C's. So I think that's as good communications advice as you're likely to hear in this increasingly volatile digital world. I hope you'll join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you all so much for your contributions. Thanks to everyone that's joined us here or has joined us on our YouTube or on ICCO's YouTube channel. And of course, this recording will be made available to all ICCO members as well. Stay tuned. We have episode 10 of ICCO Ignite coming, I think, in a couple of weeks. But until then, thank you all.
Thank you.